Some in his party are already publicly calling for his resignation, and the British Prime Minister has now answered questions from the police. It's about the lockdown parties in his office. As part of the investigation into lockdown parties at the British seat of government, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has completed and returned a police questionnaire. Johnson met the investigators' 7-day deadline to answer questions, the Prime Minister's office said on Friday evening. Johnson has been under pressure for weeks because of the alleged violations of the corona requirements at the seat of government. The media dubbed the affair Partygate. The police are now investigating in 12 cases of controversial events. The Prime Minister has many critics in his own ranks and must fear that a vote of no confidence will be sought against him in the coming weeks. A first investigative report on the Partygate affair had accused those responsible at the British seat of government of serious misconduct in complying with the rules. They would have failed to adhere to the standards that were set at the time of the corona lockdown. These apply to the entire population, including the government, the report said. But Boris Johnson illegally got a look into that thing, what was blocked by the police, that must have consequences. Amid severe tensions with the West, nuclear power Russia has held a ballistic missile maneuver. President Vladimir Putin started the exercise on Saturday from the Kremlin, spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, according to the Interfax agency in Moscow. The Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko was also there. He had already traveled to the Russian capital for talks on Friday. The politicians were seen at the famous, now already large table in the state media photos. The Russian Defense Ministry announced the maneuver on Friday. It should therefore have been planned in advance. The aim is to test the strategic nuclear weapons for their reliability. According to the Kremlin, the army fired ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. In addition, a hypersonic missile of the Kinzhal, that means dagger type, was successfully tested. Russia tests missiles several times a year. The country and the US are by far the two largest nuclear powers in the world. According to the Kremlin, one exercise was held at the test site in the Astrakhan region in the south of the country, another on the Kamchatka Peninsula in the far east of the giant empire. In addition, warships of the Black Sea Fleet and the Northern Fleet were involved. Peskov said on Friday that Putin would oversee the maneuver from the command post. It was therefore speculated whether the 69-year-old head of state would fly to the exercises. The maneuver was held parallel to the Munich Security Conference. Definitely on purpose, I'm sure. Russian maneuvers near Ukraine have met with criticism in the West. The Ministry of Defense recently announced that its troops should return to their locations after the end of exercises, but that was doubted by the USA and NATO. Russia is demanding security guarantees from the West because it sees itself threatened by the US military and the weapons in Europe, which is a joke, by the way. The test took place in parallel with a major maneuver in neighboring Belarus on the border with Ukraine, which was scheduled to end yesterday. According to the Belarusian Defense Ministry, military attachés from 16 countries visited a training ground in the southwest on Saturday, including Ukraine and the United States. Russia has expelled the deputy head of the US embassy in Moscow amid the Ukraine crisis. The expulsion of diplomat Bart Gorman was without reason and represents a step of escalation, the State Department said in Washington on Thursday. We'll check our answer, they say. Gorman had a valid visa, had been in Russia for less than 3 years, and his time there was not yet over, it said. The US government called on Russia to end the groundless expulsion of US diplomats and employees. In the current situation, it's more important than ever that both countries have the necessary diplomatic staff to facilitate communication between governments. The government in Moscow said the reason for the expulsion was a retaliatory measure for previous expulsion of a Russian diplomat, the Foreign Ministry explained. When asked, the US State Department confirmed that Gorman left his post last week. The ministry did not give an explanation as to why this only became public now, with a delay of a few days. There has long been a dispute between the United States and Russia over diplomatic personnel. Russia's ambassador in Washington, Anatoly Antonov, recently complained that 27 Russian diplomats and their families had to leave the United States at the end of January. According to him, the spouses of diplomats are having their accreditations withdrawn and their children are not being issued visas. 28 more would have to leave the United States by the end of June. At the end of January, Antonov announced a reaction from Moscow on Facebook, but at the time left open what steps Russia would take. It was only in April 2021 that the United States expelled 10 Russian diplomats and imposed new sanctions in retaliation for hacker attacks and interference in US elections attributed to Moscow. Russia responded by expelling 10 US diplomats and imposing sanctions on the US. In addition, the government in Moscow issued an entry ban for high-ranking US government officials. In addition, Russia continues to demand the withdrawal of all US troops from Eastern and Central Europe. We are convinced that the national potential in these zones is quite sufficient, Russia's foreign ministry said in a written response to a letter from Washington on Thursday. Well, but it's not their business. If the United States does not provide the required security guarantees, Moscow would be forced to react, including with military technical means, it said. In it, Russia should also demand a halt to all arms deliveries to Ukraine, reports Financial Times journalist Max Seddon on Twitter. Yeah, they wish. Recently, Russian President Vladimir Putin had repeatedly called for an end to NATO's eastward expansion and warned against including Ukraine in the alliance because this would lead to war. In the letter, Russia stressed that it was not planning an attack on Ukraine, but threatening war at the same time. At the same time, Moscow forbade Washington from interfering where Russia was allowed to station troops on its sovereign territory. And they have to allow sovereign states to decide their fate. The movement of Russian forces, including along the Ukrainian border, in no way affects the fundamental interests of the United States, Russia says. The Russian letter is the response to the US written response to the security guarantees for Europe demanded by Russia. The letter to the US side also includes the offer of new talks on security issues in Europe. Russia's Security Council had described the US military with its tens of thousands of soldiers and tactical nuclear weapons in Europe as a threat to Russia. To deter Russia, the United States had stationed its own troops there with a strength of 60,000 soldiers, 200 tanks, and 150 combat aircraft. The main goal in Europe is to create a constant threat to our country, Deputy Secretary of the Security Council Mikhail Popov told the government newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta. It's just, what a bullshit. I'm sorry. After the racist attacks in Ankara, the Turkish government started a project there to resettle Syrians. The pro-government news agency Demirören Haber Ajansi reported that people from regions where many Syrian citizens lived were to move to other parts of the country as part of the program. In August, people of Syrian origin, their shops and homes were attacked there. Hundreds of people marched through the district at the time, threw stones at apartments where they suspected Syrians were staying, and looted shops. Participation in the project is voluntary and, according to the DHA, is still in the pilot phase, but is planned to be extended to the country. So far, 4,514 people have been resettled. More than 300 abandoned buildings have already been demolished. Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu said that in regions where Syrians make up to 25% of the population, the influx of further foreigners will no longer be allowed. Exceptions would be made for sick people, separated families, and students. The mood against Syrians and other foreigners in the country has heated up significantly in recent months. According to the Ministry of the Interior, 3.7 million refugees from Syria live in Turkey, plus hundreds of thousands of other migrants from Afghanistan, for example. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.